Okay, so what I want to show you first is how to thread your needle. The thread that comes with your kit comes with needles, and it looks like that. And we're going to thread the needle by simply putting the end of the thread through the eye of the needle. Now there's wax on your thread, so when it spreads apart like that, all you have to do is run your fingers over the tips to make it come back together. Now I'm going to pull about 4 or 5 inches of thread away from the needle, and then I'm going to lay the needle right on top of the thread. And what you want to do is pierce the thread in the center of the thread, just like that. Okay, you want to get in the center. You don't want to get too far to one side or the other. If you want, you can do a second loop for added security, just like that. So now you have 2 loops on your needle. Pull the end of the thread through the eye to the end, and then grab the short end, and with a quick motion, snap it down. And then smooth your threads. So now you have your knot. You're going to repeat that on the other end of the thread. I'm just setting my needle down on a magnet while I thread the other end. Again, 4 or 5 inches pulled out. This is the other end of the thread. Lay the needle on top of the thread and pierce in the center of the thread like that. You can leave it like this by simply pulling it down. Pull that end down, and your knot is now at the end of your needle. Either way works. And smooth it out. Now I have 2 needles, one on each end of the thread. I'm going to now start the first half of my stitch. This is the right side of my piece, which has the larger holes. The wrong side, or the back side, you'll see are much smaller, almost indistinguishable holes on the back. So you can tell the difference, right? What I'm going to do is start in this first hole here on the end, and I'm just going to pass 1 needle through that hole. Then I'm going to take the second needle and pass it through the second hole, just like that. I'm going to line those 2 needles up with each other, pull them through, and you see they're lined up right here end to end. And then I'm just going to pull the thread through until I get to the bottom, which now has both threads the same length on each side. Okay, so by doing that, you have completed 1/2 of your stitch. The other half still needs to be completed on the back side. As you can see, there's space between these 2 threads. This thread that we put in first needs to go in that same hole as the second needle in order to complete the stitch. This is where making sure that you do everything the same way with each stitch will give you consistent straight stitches. So now I have both threads to the back side, or the wrong side of the piece of leather. I'm going to pull these pieces of thread towards me. If you think of the hole that you're working in as the face of a clock, this hole, the top of the hole up here would be 12 o'clock on the face of a clock. The section that goes right here, if I pull the threads down, then the area of the hole over here would be 3 o'clock. If I pull the threads forward, then the area of the hole down here would be 6 o'clock. And if I pull them up, straight up, then the area of the hole down here is 9 o'clock. So the face would be 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock on the right-hand side, 6 o'clock towards the bottom, 9 o'clock towards the left side, okay? So the reason that's important is because when you stitch, you need to decide where your needle is going to go each time. And why I say that is because each hole has at least 2 strands of thread in it. And as I said earlier, this thread needs to come up in a leapfrog fashion to go inside that second hole. So I'm going to pull these threads back towards me. You can pull them away from you. You can pull them straight up or down. It's your choice, as long as you do it the same way each time. And by pulling back on these threads gently, you will create space in that second hole. Let's see if I can show you that better. See the space that I'm creating in that second hole? I'm going to pass the thread from the first hole through that second hole like this. So I'm pulling the threads back and I'm going in front of the thread, so the 12 o'clock position, and I'm going to pass the needle through like that, making sure I'm not piercing the thread that's already in the hole. And it's coming out this side, and I can see that I'm not piercing the thread that's already in the hole. I'm still holding the other needle in my right hand, and I'm going to pull that thread through, making sure they aren't twisted. You want to untwist it like that and pull it through. Okay, so now I have completed the right side and the back side of one stitch. So then pull your threads. Snug down the stitch by pulling on the threads. Okay, so let's do that again. The next hole up is the third hole, but I'm just going up into the next available space, put it in like that, pull it over and through the hole like that. Taking my back stitch, again, this is a leapfrog action. I'm going to take this thread and put it in that hole. And I'm going to do that by pulling back on these threads to create space at the 12 o'clock position. In that hole, pull it through, and then snug it down. Again, next hole available, pull it through all the way. Now you've created half of that stitch. Pull back on both threads. Take your opposite needle and put it in the hole that's in the space above the thread, in front of the thread. Pull it down. This is how you get consistent stitches that are straight and straight on both sides. Let's do that one more time. Pass it in the hole. Always starting on the same side. I always start on the right side. You can choose to start on the left side. Either way, choose one side and stick with it each time. So pass the thread through that hole. Pull both threads back using the other needle to go through the hole that's in front of the thread. Pull it through. Tighten it down. Now, if you're using a stitching pony like I am, there's a way, it's nice because your hands are free. There's another way of doing this that you can make things go a little faster. So you're going to pass the needle in that hole. This is a horizontal needle. You're going to take your other needle that's in your other hand, and you're going to tap the bottom of that needle. Just tap the bottom where they meet. You've created a cross. You've got your index finger on the bottom of those two needles. Put your thumb on top of them. So you have a cross that you've created with both needles. Hold them with your index finger and your thumb. Pull them through. Okay, so once you get past those, the end of that, the tail end of that thread, pull it through, and then take your hand that has both of those needles in your hand. I still have the horizontal needle horizontal, and the vertical needle is still vertical. What I want to do is make the vertical needle horizontal. And to do that, you're just going to take these fingers, grab the thread on the opposite side too, so you can create some tension and make space for in the hole for the needle. Turn your hand, so now the vertical needle is now horizontal, and it's going to go in that space in front of that thread. I still have this needle in my left hand. I'm pulling through with my right hand, and this is pulling both threads through at the same time. Right? So that once you get accustomed to doing that, tighten it down, you can go faster. So let's do that again. Horizontal needle on the left, on the right. Vertical needle on the left. Grab both needles, pull it through, turn your hand so that the vertical needle is now horizontal, and pass that needle through that hole, making sure you're not catching the thread. Pull it through and tighten it down. Again, pass the needle through, it's horizontal. Cross to make a vertical, pull it through, turn your hand, add the vertical needle, which is now horizontal, through the hole, pull them both through, and tighten it down. Once again, pull it through, take these fingers and pull your thread through, turning your hand so that the vertical needle is now horizontal. Now, when you pull back tight enough that you can get that needle in that space without piercing the thread. And there's a way to check to see if you've pierced the thread before you finish passing the needle through. As you can see, the needle is inside the hole and the threads are on both sides. If you pull back and forth on this thread and you can move it freely, then you know the needle has not pierced that thread. So then pull your thread through, finishing this stitch, and snug it down. So now I want to show you how to finish a stitch. Okay, finishing a stitch is just like stitching on a sewing machine. You do what's called a back stitch. It's no different. The stitch that you create is no different than what you've been doing. Instead of going forward, you come backwards. Okay, so I have, let's say I want to finish this stitch, and you can see it's a nice straight stitch on both sides, right? But I'm finished. So instead of moving forward into that hole, I'm going to come back into the first hole coming back towards me. Now this is a little tricky because you already have two pieces of thread in there. It's a lot easier to pierce the threads. You have to look to see. And once you pierce the thread, you're going to recognize it right away. But you can see I am in between those threads in that space. You can see that, right? But what I'm looking at is, I believe back here, I have pierced the thread. See that? I've pierced the thread. So pull it back out, snug these down again, and try it again. And sometimes you need to use an awl. This time I made it. Okay, this time I made it. I got through without piercing that thread. Sometimes you can use an awl to open up that space, but awl has to be very narrow, otherwise you'll pierce the thread with the awl. So pull that thread through. Now you've got two threads on top of each other or next to each other. I know traditional leather workers do it next to each other. So that's the first one. You want to back stitch at least 2 to 3 times with each end of your thread. So this one hasn't been back stitched yet. So now it has to go in that same hole that you just came out of with the other needle. So pull that thread forward to get some tension in there and to help create some space, and pass that needle through that hole, checking to make sure it's not pierced the thread. So now I'm going to pull that thread through and I'm going to snug it down. You see now it's back stitched here and here. Let's do that again. So we start again on the right side, going back one more stitch, checking to make sure we haven't pierced the thread. And I'm piercing it, so we're going to go through again. There we go. I've passed the needle through, pull it through, and then pull it out of the way, pulling it taut so that you can pass your needle with the second thread back through that hole as well. These techniques work whether you're using a stitching pony or not. Just when you don't have a stitching pony, it's a little bit more work to manage the threads and the needles. I suggest that you do not drop your needles or put them down if you don't have to. But if you do, find a magnet or a pin cushion and put one in each side, one needle per pin cushion. Okay, so now we have 2 back stitches here and 2 here. To finish this is the right side of my leather. I don't want to leave my thread on the end of it on the right side. I want it to be on the wrong side. So I have to pass this needle one more time in order to get it on the wrong side or back side, if you will. And so now both threads are on one side, which is the side that I want them on, and it's not on the right side. At this point, all you do is trim your threads short. I like to trim them about like that. Okay. And then you're going to take a lighter. The idea here is to not burn the threads, but to melt them. As you can see, I'm using white thread. If I melt these, if you burn the threads too much heat will cause these to turn black, and that will be noticed, and you don't want that. So you just want to melt. And the way you do that is, you see they're sticking out, you light your lighter and you just get close enough and you'll see them shrink down. I didn't get it quite as short as I'd like. We're going to do that again. I'm just doing one at a time until they melt down. Now you can see, and you'll be able to feel them. They'll be a little hard because it is a polyester thread or nylon thread, whichever one you have, but you see it's not black, so it's hidden. You could also use glue here if you don't want to melt your threads. Okay. And that is how you do a basic stitch and back stitch to end your threads. This is called a basic saddle stitch, and it is the stitch that is used in the majority of a leather hand stitching. Okay. Now I'm going to show you also how to pick up where you left off if you run out of thread.